out. Hey, we're on the air with Michael Bruce. Whatever the air is these days,
Yeah.
on the internet.
Yeah,
So,
anywhere is everywhere.
yeah, that's pretty cool. So thanks for coming by and chatting with me. So we were having a pre-chat here to see if this is going to be okay, but I think it will be.
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. So we're talking a little bit about how we hated politics.
Well, what's interesting is that, when I first sat down, we started talking about politicians, and I think we all have our own preferences and likes and dislikes, but I've never considered myself as a politician, even though I'm elected by the public to represent them. I just think I'm a regular person, and I think commonsensically. I don't make decisions on whether my supporters agree with me or not. I represent the people. When I say supporters, is that you might have 5 or 6 strong advocates for you that would campaign to do anything for you to try to get you elected. But that doesn't mean I listen to them when I make the right decisions for my public or for my city.
For the city of Westport.
Yeah.
So this conversation we had a long time ago, so I'm going to bring up some old things. You said something. And I'm going to give it context, but you mentioned something about Robert's Rules of Order.
Oh, yeah.
And a personal thing with me is when someone brings up sort of an elitist thing, like, well, they should know the Robert's Rules of Order, or they're not. How do you feel? I mean, do you feel everyone should know the rules as if they go into politics? Or
well, Robert's Rules of Order are to bring some kind of order and decorum to your conversation. And it's similar to playing 5-card stud or playing poker. If you don't know the rules, how are people fair, or how do you judge who wins and who doesn't win? And Robert's Rules, even though that I didn't invent those, and actually I was involved with those, I taught those when I was in graduate school through Alice Sturgis's interpretation of Robert's Rules. It's more of a British thing, parliamentarian. Actually, the rules are a little bit different than ours. But when it comes to parliamentary procedure, any rules of an engagement, it doesn't have to be called parliamentary procedure. It has to be agreed upon how we treat one another and how we act through the process. It just so happens to be called Robert's Rules.
The reason I bring it up is I sometimes think our rules get in the way of a good conversation. And instead of having the open conversation, sometimes, well, you can't do that because this particular rule's in the way, so you can't have this conversation. Do you feel that, or you think it's?
I don't think that they necessarily were intended to get in the way, is because when someone makes a motion for it to become part of the whole group's action, it has to be seconded. And from there, the next step is open discussion. And there are no rules other than to teach each other fairly. That means you can say what you think, or what I can say what I think, or the other person can say, because that's where that open dialogue is supposed to take place. But unless you had, like I want to call it, rules of engagement, is that then anyone can bring up anything at any one time. You would never get necessarily anything done.
So it'd be chaos instead of.
And I think that was probably the reason for, I never studied the genesis of it, but it makes sense to me, is that if we all treat each other the same way and we can expect your responses to happen in a certain way, that it makes sense to me. If you come to a Westport City Council meeting, you can't watch it live. I wish we could. I've been an advocate for that, but I've never had the council approve the funding for that. And I'm thinking about bringing it up again, but our meetings are not live, but they're immediately digitized, at least the oral part of it, but there's no visual. And I think the community would get a better sense of how your council acts if they could watch it live and listen. And we probably will get to the point, some part of our democratic process is where people can send in questions live from their home. I don't know how we could interact with that, because if you had 100 questions and you don't have time to handle them all. But I think that the public should be able to participate in the process
more directly
than getting in their car and driving down.
Right. Which is this is an example of what the city could do.
So, and when I say is kind of loose parliamentary procedure. It's just a way of moving through the agenda. Part of parliamentary procedure is that the person knows the agenda is before them. I've been able to improve upon that, where we have 2 comment periods during our council meeting rather than just 1 at the very end. Didn't make sense to me, because there are things on the agenda that the public may want to be heard on, or have input, or want to have clarification before the council deliberates. And so we have 2 comment periods in Westport, which is not common practice in all cities, is that people are able to comment on anything that's on the agenda before we discuss that. And then at the end, there's a comment period. But before I became mayor, and I think I only done this the last couple of years, it was always at the end of the meeting where people was, well, how could you guys have made that decision without taking this into consideration? And so finally, after that happened a few times, I said, well, folks, why don't we have 2 comment periods? So it made sense to me.
Right. Well, that's a good innovation on that.
But I could see, well, if you watch the Senate and our representatives that use parliamentary procedure through filibuster and so forth as a disadvantage, and there's ways to use anything to someone's advantage, right?
Always.
But the whole idea of having a procedure, whether it's called parliamentary procedure or rules of conduct or whatever you want the council or any deliberating body to go through, it makes sense. So you know how people are expected to respond and how they will be treated.
Hello there. We have a visitor here. I think he needs to go. I was wondering.
Hey, I've been called a cool cat. Okay, twice in my life, but I guess it worked.
That's the home video market there.
So, Mark, in the context of parliamentary procedure, and I don't want to turn the tables because I'm less of the respondent. I guess it's a conversation.
No, it's a conversation.
Is that if I use the poker analogy, when we sit down and we deal a hand of poker, and the rules will state what's a winning hand and what's a losing hand,
right,
and so forth. That's kind of what parliamentary procedures is how the rules are gonna work, and if we both know the rules.
Right.
And so I remember our context of my conversation, but if a person doesn't understand how they work, then they can't either, number one, use them to their advantage, or number two, hear them for a proper hearing on their topic. So it's incumbent upon me to make sure that they understand those rules.
Okay, well, and that's good, because I think that one thing that concerns me in any kind of conversation is someone says, "Well, you don't know those rules. I'm going to use them against you, and you have to obey them, even though you don't know them." Right? So you use the rules, this little rule book you pull out, and go, "Ha, gotcha," you know. And I think that is something that concerns me in conversation. I see people doing that, "Ha, gotcha," you know, the gotcha mentality.
Yeah, the gamesmanship. I suppose one could use it for one-upmanship or whatever, but that's not the intent of it. The intent of it is fair play.
Right.
It's not to be used against you. And the other thing about understanding motions and how they work is that one thing came up in the city council meeting a month or so ago, where someone moved to table something, and I asked if there was a second, and the council member said, "Mr. Chairman, I want to beg your pardon on this, but a motion to table doesn't require a second." And I said, "Well, I believe that it does, and so not only does it require a second, it requires a discussion." And so there was someone seconded, and even though that the council member disagreed with me, common sense tells you let's use Aberdeen and Hoquiam, for example. They have 12 council members. Does that mean everything on their agenda, all it takes is one member to hold their hand up and say, "I would like to table this," and it's a done deal? Because they never get any work done. So the whole idea of parliamentary procedure, if a second person seconds it, then you can discuss it, then you vote, because it takes a majority of the council to approve that. Mm-hmm. So when the council member in their own judgment said, "I don't think that requires a second, that once someone tables it, it should be tabled." So in my research, I went back and looked, and under the British common law is that if that's the rule before this deliberation begins, that everyone knows that if anyone tables it, then it's an approved form. Right. But it's not common in the way that we use it in America.
Right. Well, the reason I bring it up, and that was a good example, because the point is, why are they tabling? because that's sort of like a why, because they don't want to discuss the issue because it's too hard to handle. I mean, we should have discussions about them. And when people just, well, I can get enough votes. Well, what if the one person that's dissenting is actually the person that's making the more rational decision, and that's that we're not engaging in conversation. And that's kind of why I say that Robert's rules always can be used to prevent a good conversation, to really understand an issue, simply because one person or a group of people say, no, we don't want to talk about it because it's too hard of an issue, or we like it the way it is.
And so, my opinion, that's the reason why it requires a second and requires a discussion, because if Michael Bruce, if I was on the council, held up my hand or asked for the floor's attention and said, I think this should be tabled, if there's no discussion, he or she does not have to say why she wants to table.
Right.
And so I think that it could be a valid point that would sway the rest of the council.
Right.
One thing that I think doesn't get enough traction in conversation in the public is the mayor doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of power.
Right.
It's the council.
Right.
And the mayor's elected as so-called the CEO of the city, but to make sure that there's decorum and the people are heard, treated fairly to the best of their ability, because sometimes it doesn't always seem to be fair. So it depends on whether in the audience or from my chair, I guess.
Right.
But the council are the ones that make the rules. And so ultimately the council has to come to some kind of decision. In our democracy, it says the majority.
Right.
And there was a recent veto that I had to do on something that we were equally split on as the planning commission as well as the city, and so I invoked the veto. But that only has the council revisit that to see they can overturn my veto, and it takes a majority plus one. In our case, that would be 4 out of 5 council members. I think going back over the history of 12, this is the end of my 12th year, that I think I've had to do that 3 or 4 times, and I think maybe just 3, but I can think of a couple other times. But they were never overturned because they just weren't. I mean, it wasn't the supermajority of the council that believed that. But be wary of councils that agree on everything.
Yeah.
And that's not what our society should be, as a bunch of conformists.
Right.
That one person has an idea, and then if you don't have a bunch of followers, you're a jerk. I think that sometimes in our city council, we have 1 or 2 people that will bring up something and don't want to hear what the other members think, or they don't care because this is their belief, you're not going to change me. Well, that's not the way our society is built, that everyone should have a fair hearing and be able to speak their mind. You may not get everyone to agree with you.
Right.
But and something else about policymaking is that men and women that sit on councils or boards or commissions make the best decisions on the information they have.
Right.
That doesn't mean things can't change in the future. We should never be locked into, well, that was the decision that was done, that can never be undone, and that is not true. It's because things change, societies change, rules change, and sometimes the information changes.
Right.
And so it's incumbent upon councils, and a good city mayor will bring those up, for discussion, or when things change, or he or she may not be made in a timely fashion apprised of that, but when you do find out, you should bring it forward. And so once again, anything can be changed, but it takes, in our society, the democracy is the majority rules.
Right. Well, I mean, like you said, make sure people are being heard, because they may know something you don't know, or have a different way of attacking the problem. And
it may sound like a conflict internally. I will say this, is that even though things can get contentious in council meetings and debate can become lively, and there are people that their emotions rise to the top, that in my 12 years, I can only count 2 times that I ever lost any sleep over what went on in a council meeting, because I kind of leave it there. I mean, this is what we're doing, and we're doing it for the good of our public. I don't go home and fret about what would have happened if I would have said this, or what would have happened if someone else would have done that, because I can't change that. I can't change that when I get home, and I don't spend a lot of time. I have to decompress sometimes, watch a Western or something, just to get down to a relaxed state.
Right.
But it's it's good things that, the people that volunteer to run for office or to work on boards and commissions, whether it's the library board, the planning commission, the civil service commission, they're all good people with good intentions, and they care about their communities. That's why they volunteer. Where people fall apart, decide not to run again, or if they run and get defeated, it's not because they don't care. It's just because people maybe didn't understand their vision or didn't buy into their vision. They shouldn't take it personal. They shouldn't take it personal that they didn't get reelected or appointed to a position, that they aren't being valued, because that's not true. Because it's a democracy where more people that vote for one person or another get elected. It's easy for me to say, but that's the reality of it. It doesn't mean that you are a bad person because you don't get elected. And you know what, I would say 98% of me. I'm running right now. I'm running for my 4th term as mayor, and some people say, "Why don't you want to just step aside and let somebody else do it? You've already had 12 years at it." Well, that was my plan: is to end this term and not fade into the sunset, but potentially run for county commissioner in the future, or just do something different. But what changed my mind was when Randy Lewis, our city administrator for 16 and a half years, went to work for the port. And then I had the industries in our town that says we don't want to lose the mayor and the city administrator all in 1 year. And so I was encouraged to run. And so I decided to run. And then there's no sense trying to run unless you want to win the election. You know what I'm trying to say? But I've resigned to the fact that if I lose it, there's life after politics, or at least the mayor of Westport. And the Bearden family is a good family, and he decided he wants to be mayor. I'm just saying, at this time, I'm probably, I know without a fact that I'm the best choice because of my experience and what I know and the connections I have with the state, county, and federal government. That doesn't mean the next guy can't learn that or glean from that. But there is a big sucking sound that the community doesn't understand when you lose the legacy of the city administrator for 16 and a half years and lose the mayor that has 12 years working with that for common goals to get the things done that we've done, and then all of a sudden have complete newness. They can't expect it to be business as usual, that everything will be fine and dandy, because it just won't. There are too many things that are done on a daily basis that require knowledge of what's going on. And we have capital improvement plans. We have our 2 enterprise funds, water and sewer funds. We have currently we have a capital improvement plan for our airport that has to be developed by October. We have a shorelines management plan. We have critical areas ordinances that need to be worked on. We have a hazardous mitigation plan that's in the process. We have our tsunami evacuation plan, which I co-wrote with the State Emergency Management Division 3 years ago, that needs to be updated. All of these things are ongoing, and you bring somebody that hasn't been part of our process in our community, like a city administrator, that they may have been the city administrator of Rainier, and what do they know about the fishing fleet or the fishing industry and so forth? And then you bring a new mayor on that doesn't understand all the things that go on in the back channel.
Well, it's a job.
It's more than just checking in at council meetings.
Right. One of the things that I was talking to Randy Buer about something that he said, and I think it's something that made me really think hard, because I realized that you are more of a full-time mayor than we might get in somebody else that may have other responsibilities. So, I mean, how many hours of work do you say you put in on a week?
I've never really kept track of it, and it's got its ebbs and flows, and some days and some weeks require more time than others. And there will be people that tell you the first couple of years of my term, I was known. I had one council member that said I was the drive-by mayor, because at that time I could leave my job at school when I taught at school, and I'd go down and sign documents. I'd drive in the drive-up window, and they'd hand me stuff out. But I had a good working relationship with Randy that I knew I had a comfort zone there. And I also, he could reach me at phone anytime, or I could talk to him. Then I was also going through some issues where I was in a wheelchair for 4 years. So it was really uncomfortable for me to try to come in to City Hall. And not making excuses, but I thought myself out of that. It was a post-polio syndrome that hit me, that put me in a wheelchair, that made me cause weight. I've had to reevaluate things. I've had major surgeries since that time. I'm probably the healthiest I've ever been. Also, since I've been mayor, not at the city's expense, but my own indebtedness. I've finished a master's degree in public administration as well as an MBA in human resource management, because my goal at some point was, if it didn't happen in the city of Westport, that I'd love to be a city administrator for another city.
Right.
So I have those skills, but that's just me. Being a mayor, elected city council member, or a mayor doesn't require you to be anything but popular to win in the popular vote.
Right.
It doesn't require that. So it's actually an added thing for me when I'm running for mayor, that I have those abilities to do a lot of things. And I work with tourism too. I've been a photographer for most of my life.
Right.
And so I've been promoting our city. When I was at a training session in Chelan a while back for emergency preparedness with fire inspections and so forth, and taking photographs at a fire and crime scene. I took a 40-hour course with Chief Ben on that. And I actually visited 2 radio stations in Chelan to talk about the charter boat fishing industry. I took time off in the afternoon or early in the morning before I was in my class to go out and promote our city. There's never a day that I'm not promoting our city. And so, but that's my personality, and that's my comfort zone, because my first degree was in radio, television production, and I have a master's degree in communication. And so my comfort zone is working in those venues where other people aren't even happy speaking publicly.
Right.
And so that just sets me apart from anyone that were to run. One thing that I'm proud of about politics is that I was elected twice to a city council in another city. I've elected mayor 3 times here, and I ran for county commissioner. And I counted up one time that I've had 27 opponents that I ran against. They were all good people with good intentions that would have probably done fine if they got elected. But I've never been accused of being a dirty guy or campaigning, doing dirty things or tactics. I've always been respected by the people that I've ran against, and I hope to always be that way.
Making sure there's no comments, see if someone's like, yeah, well, that's an example.
Yeah. Well, I was telling you before we went on the air that I do this at least once a month on KBKW Coffee Talk, and going for an hour program, but we have commercial breaks and there's news. So you're actually on the air for 40 minutes, I think. And people call up, and ask me questions. And it's usually what's interesting, it's not usually people that agree with you on issues. It's people that take a political stance, either the Republican point of view or the Democratic point of view or whatever, or challenge me on things that I don't have any influence over.
Right.
One of the issues that when I ran for county commissioner, and any race should never be a one-issue race. I don't care if you're running for a dog catcher or the mayor, but they used to always challenge me on what I thought about Wild Olympics. And I says, I have my own personal preferences on preservation of land and so forth. Is that what we don't save today, future generations won't get to see? I felt that ever since I was a little guy. I've always been environmentally concerned, so to speak. But I also realized that as Congress said, it can make that decision, and there's people voting on that, what happens in the Wild Olympic campaign, that will never set foot in our state, that they'll do as political trade-off to get someone to vote for something in New York or New Jersey or someplace else. And that's the political process. And so why would someone want to put their own, I can tell you my belief system, but to sign off on something that I have no control over, the vote of the Congress, it's really silly. To measure me on whether I should be a county commissioner or a mayor or whatever, when that's not a decision that I'll ultimately get to make.
It's now the valid, playing devil's advocate here. One thing I would say is it does show your thinking process, so you can, and you just demonstrated it there. I have my personal preference, how I might vote if I had the vote. This is how I would vote because this is the things I want to see. Or you could say, well, I don't have enough information to make it
a better question.
Okay.
Would be for someone to sit across the table and says, Michael Bruce, if you were elected, would you support this if we ask you to do that? And I would say, yes, that's my job. See, that's where my job is different than my personal preferences, is that I have to do the will of my community. Let's say the will of the community was completely opposed to what I think. That's what I'm elected to do, is represent my community. But I can always say, this is my preference or what I want to do.
Right.
We're going to bring it up, but let's lay it out there on the table is the current discussion on oil. Okay. Yes. And oil being produced in the port and so forth. I have my own preferences on what I think the port should be doing. I think that the port should be encouraging job growth. There's other ways to do that. But I'll tell you what, one oil spill that puts Westport out of business. And so it affects all of the fishermen. It affects our ecosystem,
Right.
and so forth. So I would have to support that. But on the flip side, and I'm not afraid to support that, and you'll see that I have a position paper coming out on that during the EIS. I wasn't able to attend the meetings that were held at SATSUP or at DNR. That doesn't mean that I don't have an opinion.
Right.
And you'll be seeing that soon online. But I also grew up in Skagit County, which right outside of Skagit County and Island County, we have the refineries of Texaco and Shell. And at Cherry Point to the north in Whatcom County, we have Cherry Point, which they have refineries up there. And I've also fished in Bellingham Bay and off Blaine outside of this. And at the same time, the people, when those refineries were being built, we still had the same environmental faction saying, woe was us if something were to happen. And they were still built. What's interesting. And so I do see that it can work, but I also will tell you that anything mechanical will break down, whether it's an airplane in the sky or whether it's a ship being loaded. You can take all the safeguards in transporting crude.
Well, they're not taking all the safeguards.
They are not. And we found that with the rail system.
And that was my thing I was going to bring up. The rail system's a disaster. It shouldn't go where it's going. There's no emergencies.
The rail needs to be safe no matter what's being transported on it, whether it's grain, because they have weight limits on those cars. Doesn't matter what's inside of it. Yeah. But I don't agree that crude oil should be going through Aberdeen.
Yeah. Well, look at where the train track goes.
Yeah.
You know, it's not well thought out. It wasn't mapped. It just. Yeah, I mean, basically they'd given up on the rail, and then all of a sudden now we're using the rail that hasn't been really utilized for years and years. So I think it's a bad move. I mean, that's my personal, based on just what I've seen in research.
And from the political side of it, Mark, is that the companies that come in and apply for a business license in my town, or apply to the port, or Hookworm, or wherever they may apply, they already know what's allowable uses and what isn't. And so you can't just say we're not going to allow that if it's on our books as allowable use.
Right.
So what needs to happen is, if a community or an entity doesn't want that to be an allowable use, they need to change their policies.
Right.
And you can't change it after somebody applies and you start through the process, because there's investment there, political investment as well as monetary investment, and people are going through that process. That doesn't mean it can't be stopped, but I'm saying is that whatever has.
Well, let me ask you this, and this is something I've always argued since we're on this subject. Okay, my biggest argument is the train track is going where it's going. It just wasn't well thought out. It needs to be put on the opposite side of the shopping center, right? That's where it should have been, or and then give them a chance to get it off the main road there. I mean, it's interrupting business. It's just a disaster in terms of how it's going to impact a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have a trade-off. You're going to get these jobs, and you're going to lose these jobs, or you're going to lose that whole shopping center district, because you're going to increase traffic so much. I mean, those trains come in there more often, and if you talk about the frequency, what they were talking about, you're going to get a huge impact. Those people simply won't go there because they're afraid they're going to get stuck behind a wall of trains. Mm-hmm. So in that scenario, could you say, even though it's allowable use because of the impact of so many cars coming through, could you say, well, you have to upgrade the train tracks before we can use it for that use, and you have to give us a schedule? I mean, would that be a tactic you could take legally based on the rules right now?
I don't think if we moved the train track up on the mountainside and come over the top that I would change my position on crude oil out in the harbor. It doesn't matter where the train track is.
For you,
for the spill. But I can tell you, probably maybe not be the most articulate on this, but in the 1800s, when they're building trains, they weren't thinking about crude oil production. And when the train tracks were built out to the coast, they were thinking about transporting timber, and so forth. So I don't think any thought was put into the railroads about the crude oil situation. And I will say that the argument from the train tracks being moved to the opposite side where it should have been all along, well, that's not where the business corridor or the most efficient means was when it was being built or had been over. And then I've heard the argument, well, it would take almost, it'd be impossible for many, many years for that to happen because of the SEPA-NEPA process and being a shorelines problem and moving it, and so they don't see that happening in the near future. So that's a whole different type of argument.
Right.
And also our forefathers or our current people that were making the plans never foresaw the mall being right there on the water either. And so all of that stuff adds more problems to the situation than resolves the conflict. And so I know that whether it's cars being shipped that to be exported by rail, or whether it's grain that's being shipped, and then the crude oil is the most disastrous thing to be hauled on that rail line. Even though they're doing some improvements, that's not what it was designed to do. Right. And so I won't change my position on the crude rail. And you know what? Imperium apparently hasn't had problems. There haven't been problems there, but that doesn't mean they won't happen. I mean, we have to err on the side of, if it does happen, how it will affect us. And I like the whole idea that the ports improving their capacity for shipping more cars, automobiles, and then they got the what's called Rolos or Ro-Ros, roll on, roll off, where these big ships come in with big machinery that roll off at the RO or roll on to be transported elsewhere. Our rail in that area doesn't help the passage in Montesano, or excuse me, Elma, where their town is bifurcated. Right. And when the train stops and they have health issues, if someone has a heart attack, they can't get an ambulance to them. Or in front of Walmart or that area there, where the parking lots are filled and the train is stopped and they need some emergency help. I mean, there is one way to get in there over by the guest house or guest suites, whatever the name of that place is this week, to get in there in an emergency, but that doesn't change that. But the rail needs to be improved for what they're transporting now.
Right.
Let's forget about the crude oil. The crude oil can go someplace else. Why don't they ship it straight to California, where they plan on producing it and putting it on ships and send it to California anyway? Why don't they just ship it to California?
Does that have to do with the pipeline? You know, they want to.
Yeah.
I mean, and crude. How long are we going to have the crude? You know, there's all kinds of things. But that's I like that particular question. It illustrates your thinking process on when you have that kind of problem. Because for me, it's not what the ultimate solution is. It's realizing that there's a lot of variables in play, and that you have to determine what are the things you could do. You can't just say, no, I don't want it under any circumstances. You could say, well, if they have a new super tanker that's just awesome, and you know, the train track, they buried it underground. I mean, there's a scenario where you would say, well, if I have an objection, it'd be very unreasonable. So that's a good question.
Well, you could use a scenario that, hey, would you approve double hull tankers out here moving crude oil that's refined out of the harbor? And I said, well, yeah, that would help reduce the risks in one area, but that doesn't reduce the risks of spilling into the dock, which our tides go in and out.
Right.
I mean, or a train that tips over with crude oil getting in the Chehalis River.
Right.
And that, you know, I mean, we can't mitigate. The easiest way to mitigate all potential problems, not to allow it to begin with. But what I'm saying is that the flip side is that I've grown up in those communities where they have more problems with cleaning the system, where they have explosions within the system and not with oil in the harbor. You know, where people have died, you know, cleaning the crackers and so forth that do the production of gasoline and so forth.
Oh, okay.
There have been people killed on site due to malfunctions. The Shell had one, or the Texaco. I think it was Texaco, and Anacortes had one like 3 years ago, where they had several people that perished while they were cleaning the system, where something ignited that it shouldn't have, and it blew up. I mean, that types of things happen. But for our ecosystem out here on the harbor, and for all of the species of that are harvested by our fishermen, it would be devastating to have that happen. And I don't see people surfing in oil-laden waters,
right?
You know,
right.
Or recreationing or charter boat fishing or anything. So the whole idea of that happening is very distasteful for me, even the thought of it.
Yeah. No, and I can definitely see that it's really not a safe way of doing it, unfortunately, based on what our economy is. Another issue that has interesting is the recreational marijuana
Oh, yeah.
moratorium. Is it sort of a divided council on that? What's the current?
Well, it's interesting because the council has always been divided, and the planning commission was divided, and I've been around marijuana and marijuana users most of my life because I grew up in that culture of the '60s. I graduated in '72, and went off to college a few times, but I'm not a user. Which is interesting is that I've never purchased marijuana in my life. I've been around it. I've been to parties where people smoked it, or on college campuses or whatever. I've never seen a problem with it. I see a problem with illegal activities. Um, uh, um, I think that part of that reefer madness from the Richard Nixon era, from the '60s, and all of that stuff, I think it still lingers. But there's so many people that use marijuana products for medical reasons that keeps getting swept under the carpet because they think it's pot. It's going to tear down our city. I had one council member accuse me of becoming a drug king or a drug lord, and we might just put razor wire around our city because all these potheads and drug users are going to come to Westport if we legalize it. And I said, it's already here. Get your heads out of the sand. It's just not legalized. And I'm not buying it through the proper channels, but to think that it isn't here is ridiculous. And actually my stance is, first of all, I mean, I just said it a second ago, but I'll go on record. I'll take a urine test anytime you want about what drugs I don't even use painkillers, for gosh sakes. When I've had major surgery, they sent me home with OxyContin, and I put it in a safe so other people couldn't get it. And then I disposed of it just because they ship you out of the hospital. You got to take this because your pain's going to be so bad. I like to be in control of myself. I don't like to take drugs. But the state approved it. The county approved it. And our city voters that voted during that election, 57% of the voters voted. So if they want to use it if they're 21 and over, I don't think that I should stand in the way of the council. That's their own personal choice. That's where I came from. Yeah, I'm not forcing it down anybody's throat. But I mean, like I said, I'll take a P test for people think that I'm a drug user, but there's no P test for ignorance. I mean, I can't say, hey, go pee in a bottle and see if you're smart enough.
So let me ask you a question here. Do you think there should be a test for voters?
A test?
Yeah, you think voters should have to take a test before they can vote?
I don't know how I could rationalize that.
So.
No, I mean, I just don't think what would be on the test. Who would write the test?
Well, yeah, no. So what would your answer?
Well, I know I don't know. Do I think someone should have to take a test to vote? No.
Okay.
Because that's not the democratic way. Well, it's the majority.
Let me actually tell you, that was actually kind of a trick question, because that was actually the test. See, I invented the test just to see if you should vote. And the answer to the question is no. And if you vote yes, you lose your vote.
Yeah. Well,
so that's the way it works. That's how that test works.
I mean, I've heard people ask me, do you think people should be tested before they get unemployment, or do you think they should be tested for this and tested for that? Well, who's going to write the test? And what is a litmus test for anything?
Right.
And that's what I'm saying is that so many. I mean, we've lived through this. I'm older than you, but how many politicians that have been elected at all different levels that you shake your head at? How did they ever get elected? It's because they were popular, they were good looking, or they were articulate or something. That's how they got elected. It doesn't make them the smartest person. Right,
and it doesn't necessarily make them a good leader. Just because you're the smartest person doesn't mean you're the best person for the job.
Yeah, there were people think I'm anti-fisherman. That's not true at all. I don't think many people in my community know that I fished 3 seasons in Alaska. I was not in the Bering Sea or the most dangerous places. I was fishing salmon or herring or something, or working on tenders as a cook or as a deckhand. But I do have an understanding of the fisherman's life, the quality of life, and I've had a lot of fishermen. I grew up around the fishermen. My family was on logging, but I understand that. But I also understand that a boat is not a democracy. A boat is a dictator. If you don't do what the captain does, you either get left at the dock or something, because otherwise it's called mutiny. When you start having people on deck voting how we're going to do things. And some of the people that have been on the council that are fishermen or have that legacy don't understand that when it comes to working with employees, why you just can't fire them or why you can't just leave them at the dock and tell them to take their gear, because there's processes with the unions. You just can't just let somebody go. And I also see that some of the deliberations on the council is that it's not a dictatorship, folks. It's a democracy. It's a little bit different. Is that just because you believe this and you yell, screamer, louder and harder than anybody else, that this is the way it's going to be done? That's just not it. That's the difference between running a boat and working in a democratic society, because there's not a democracy on the boat. You have to follow what the leader, which is the ship's captain, what they decide, or you'll be left at the dock when you go to town, if you make it that far.
Right.
Otherwise, it's called mutiny, because I don't know any ship captain that goes out on a deck and asks everybody, what do you think we should do now? By the rate, okay, 3 of you say this and 2 of you say that, so this is what we're going to do.
Well, democracy in some ways isn't the most... I grew up in a Quaker community, so consensus was something that they really honored, and I really had to look at the difference between the concept of consensus and the concept of democracy. The mob rules, and you get into kind of where one dissenter actually still has a vote, even though not a vote necessarily, but they're
have a voice,
has a voice, because maybe they have wisdom that you haven't considered. So I do think democracies in some ways suck, because we get people that get very stubborn. He said, well, I have the 5 votes I need. I don't care what you have to say. I'm done. I'm done listening. I'm done considering alternatives. So, I mean, it's just a reality of the situation that I think people should be listened to. They may be wrong, but then if you're not actually able to change your mind based on better information, then I think that's a problem.
And that's the key, is you have to listen to be able to know whether your information is faulty or not. You have to take all sources, and then use your filter. Now, consensus, in the term that you're using, is a little bit different than the democratic way, because in consensus, that means you accept the responsibilities for what go right and go wrong.
Right.
In democracy, well, in the democratic system, say the city council, if they're divided and they vote 3-2, the 2 people that dissented still go on dissenting outside the council chambers and telling their people, they said, I didn't vote for that. They don't take responsibility. That's the difference between consensus.
Right.
And so that's what I'm saying, is that that's when you fair. talk it out, and even though you've heard other people's dissenting comments or why we should do it differently, there's still this togetherness when you make a decision. And I know that you probably have more to say about this, but I've worked on several boards and commissions in my lifetime where we really fought behind closed doors our differences, and angrily talked about things. But when we left, we would go out and have a sandwich and a beer or a soda pop, whatever, afterwards, and we embraced whatever decision was made. We didn't go out and wildcat afterwards. And I see that a little bit different in city councils, where people, not only do they have their opinion, but I'll be damned, this is my opinion, I'm not going to change. And they want the voting public to know, no matter what my council decides, this is what I think. And I wish we would work better together, when we make a decision moving forward.
Yeah, I think there's a lack of accountability sometimes, even personal accountability. Well, the city council did it and it turned out to be right, or they did it and turned out to be wrong, sort of like, oh, we made a mistake there. What did we learn from that particular decision? How can we do better next time? So we're not, that's how I see it. That may not be true at all.
Well, I think you've hit it, because why did they make the decision?
Right.
Is it knee-jerk, or is it something that their neighbor wanted, and so they pushed it? And that's something that's really interesting to discuss, is the fact that our city council has a potential to changing every 2 years, because 1 year there'll be 3 council positions open. 2 years later, there'll be 2 council positions and a mayor. The most important position on the city council is being a council member. It's not the mayor.
Right.
because the mayor doesn't make policy. He enforces the policy. The mayor doesn't create ordinances. He makes sure the ordinances are followed. The mayor can offer you information or help you write something or work with the attorney to do things. But the most powerful position of those 5 council members in our town, and hopefully in Aberdeen, it's those 12 people. And for someone to aspire to want to be the mayor, you almost have to have your head examined, because you have to, I enjoy doing it. And like I said, I don't have an ego about it. A lot of people that want to be the mayor is just so that people will call the mayor. When I go in, I would prefer just to go and have lunch and not say, hey, Mayor Bruce or whatever. I'm just Michael Bruce there having lunch.
Right.
But that changes. But if someone wants to be in office to make a difference, it has to be on the council. It has to be. It's not the mayor.
Right.
And I think here's what happens when you become mayor is that everything that goes right, you don't get credit for. Everything goes wrong, you get all the credit. And every decision the council makes, good or bad, is the mayor. This is what the mayor wanted, what the mayor didn't want. And when you have litigation against the city, it's the mayor caused this to happen, or the mayor didn't approve it. I can't sign a check. You know, my signature on the check, but it has to be approved. To pay a bill has to be approved by the council. To pay payroll has to be approved by the council. I have a small amount you can spend as discretionary funds for silly things, that you need for your office or whatever. But I can't go out and buy a vehicle, or I can't, the mayor can't a mayor can't sign a contract without the council's approval. The mayor can't allow any settlement to take place without the council approval. The council has all of the power. But it's really silly that I see things on Facebook. Well, this is what the mayor doesn't like, or not doesn't like, but this is what the mayor caused, or this is the mayor's fault. And I'm going, they just don't understand the process. The mayor becomes the voice for the council. This is what the council decided. Doesn't make it my decision. It's the council decision. And even in a legal situation where attorneys are involved over litigation over a property problem that may have happened 10 years ago, and somebody brings it to the council, and then they have our insurance coverage, WCIA actually reviews that, their team, and then we have our own attorney, and says, how do we defend this? What do we do? And then they say, oh, there's a statute of limitations. Well, we can't do anything because they didn't do something within so many years. Well, then it becomes the mayor didn't want to have this happen, so it didn't happen. They don't get it. The council can open back up. The council can do anything. The mayor, his hands are tied on everything. What I do have is the ability to hire and fire, because that comes under my purview as the mayor. And I have the ability that when the council is deadlocked, that I can break a tie as long as it doesn't involve the expenditure of funds or signing a contract.
Wow. I
can, on a resolution, I can break a tie. But if there's money involved, if it's a tie, there's nothing I can do about it because I can't spend money. And then I have the veto power only if I feel that an ordinance was passed that needs to be revisited. And that's what the veto is really all about, is to revisit it and look at it.
Right. And
if we have the majority of the council that want to overturn the veto, it's a done deal. I can scream and stomp my feet and knock on the window. It's not going to change things. But that's just a step back and take a look at it. And do we have the ability to do that? To go back about the recreational marijuana thing, we had a new council member come on, and I think it was March, and Robert Shelton, I think, died in February. I might have my dates wrong. But what happens when you have a vacancy on the council and somebody may resign or may move out of the district or our city, or they may pass away, is that you advertise publicly to who might be interested in the council position. And the council is the one that places the people on the council. It's not the mayor. The mayor doesn't select. This is my choice. And the only time that the mayor steps in is because in a case where you have one missing, that means there's a potential tie. Now, a mayor can make a decision on that case for placing someone if the council is deadlocked, or the mayor can say, I'm not going to make a choice, re-advertise, and you need 3 votes. That's whatever. But for someone to say the mayor is going to select that position, that's not the way it happens. I'm just telling you, the mayor doesn't personally go out and say, I want you to do that. That's up for the council to decide. on behalf of the city. The mayor only decides in a case of a tie. But even when the discussion about legalization of marijuana came up a year and a half to 2 years ago, I had a couple council members say, "Hey, there's an election coming up," and he says, "I'm not gonna do this or do that, Mayor. You're gonna have to break the tie." If it was 2-2. And I said, well, I'm not afraid to do that. I'm not afraid to break a tie. But for someone to say I won't vote one way or the other because there's an election that they're going to be tied to, and it was an interesting conversation to say the least. And it was also discussed at that time about doing an advisory ballot after our community already voted 57%, right, even though it was a low voter turnout. But I've never had anyone come to us and say, there was a low voter turnout, I don't think that person should have been elected, or I don't think we should have passed a school levy or an EMS levy or a bond. You know, I'm just saying is that I've never heard that argument before about there was a low voter turnout, so it's invalidated. But I'll buy into it. Okay, we had low voter turnout. Well, the council as a whole, I mean, they always had 3 or more people that I felt that wanted to ban the recreational and medical marijuana in the city of Westport. And so when they sent it to the planning commission, they sent an ordinance for having the planning commission concur with them that we should have a total ban. And the planning commission, when they discussed it, said, no, we think that we should still zone it to happen somewhere in our city. And they came up with a zone. And I will agree, it wasn't the best worded resolution that came from the planning commission, because there were some laws that changed on July 1 that were taken into account when they made their decision, because they weren't asked to look at those laws. They were asked just to ban it by our city council. So they didn't give the council didn't give them any wiggle room. So they made their best recommendation on the knowledge they had at that time. When they sent it to us for deliberation, there was some law change. So the council had no choice but to turn down the resolution the planning commission sent forth, which they had a split decision, but they were in favor of it, zoning it. But the council, I gave them every opportunity to remand it back to the planning commission with the new laws so they could revisit it. And the council didn't do that. They could. There was one councilwoman that made that motion. No one seconded it, so it died. And the next motion was to completely ban it. So they voted, and it takes 2 votes to ban or to pass an ordinance, to say. So they voted on a Monday. Then we had a workshop that Thursday, and they voted a second time. So I had no choice to get the planning commission to revisit it, or the council to revisit the issue, than to veto it. Otherwise, you had a total ban, taking in disregarding what the planning commission thinks, which is 5 members of our community that are volunteers for the good of our community that were split in our split council. And then the whole idea of raising the awareness of the community, doing an advisory vote, came up again during our discussion for extending the moratorium. And I said, we've already been down that path, but we decided we didn't want to spend the thousands of dollars to do that. And I said, well, I view this as the advisory vote. You know, if we want, if I get elected, the conversation will continue.
Let's step back from the political aspect of this and the games that go on here, and ask, what is the impact? Like, for example, you can have marijuana in the city limits, right? I mean, there's nothing preventing you from going to Aberdeen and purchasing marijuana and just bringing this. So the only thing the city's really doing is shooting themselves in the foot, saying, well, we don't want any of the money that we could potentially get from the sales of marijuana.
Right. And that,
I mean, did that pretty much sum it up? Or?
Yeah, you just ahead of me about 3 paragraphs, because I was going to explain to you is that when the laws changed, they put recreational marijuana and medical marijuana under the same roof. Right now, there are 2 different things going on.
Right, yeah.
And the medical marijuana shop that's right outside our city limits, I think it's called the Westport Collective Gardens, closes June 30th because the law is July 1, so you have to have recreational. And well, I'm assuming it'll close unless they put in a license to sell recreational marijuana there. I don't know if they will or not, but I'm just saying is that's the argument the council had, is that we already have it right out of city limits. Why do we want to allow it in our city? I said, well, 2 reasons. The law changed the last legislative session. And I said, and we lose the revenue stream with people buying in Aberdeen, Kirkland, Seattle, where all our tourists come from, where it's legal to buy. We're losing that revenue stream, you know, because they're bringing it with them already, folks. It's already here. That's the point. It's already here. And the same thing, we could ban all liquor in our city, so they have to buy it someplace else.
Right.
And I don't think the council wants to go there either. But why do we allow that? It's because to give the adults their choice if they want, and it's the revenue stream that we derive from it.
Well, it's also the business if someone wants to run that business.
Right. And so, believe me, I've had more people contact me during this whole discussion about the medical aspect of marijuana more than the people that said, I want to be able to buy it recreationally. Right. And we have a lot of people with PTSD, we have MS problems, we have pain-related problems, a lot of problems that people use THC for those medical reasons that don't have the addiction problem of OxyContin, a lot of prescription medicines they get that will do the same thing. And so I was listening to that, and I don't want to beat this like a dead horse. I don't use the darn stuff, but I'm not going to tell you you can't use it if you want to use it and you're an adult.
Well, you can look at the long there, and I think one thing that we do know, because now that we can experiment, and let's face it, this is a social experiment. We did it with alcohol, and now we're experimenting. We're experimenting with what the legalization means. I mean, what is the impact on society? I mean, there's some examples in the world, but if you think about it, I mean, Washington, I don't know, 3 states now, they're experimenting with this idea that, hey, maybe people can be treated as adults instead of being treated as children that aren't responsible and can't make responsible decisions. I mean, that's basically what it boils down to. I mean, can people be responsible for potentially all drugs, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, can be devastating to someone's life if they're not careful. I mean, didn't you used to smoke or?
No.
Never smoked. Well, nor have I, so I can't speak to that.
I can't say this is the only reason, but that's probably why I'm not a pot smoker, is because I can't smoke anything. I had asthma when I was a kid, right, and I don't smoke. I mean, I'm not a smoker, whether it's Viceroys or anything else.
So it's the first step, it's the easiest way to get marijuana is to smoke it. So most people don't have inhalers or special tools that they come out with, but it will become easier and easier, and that's one thing that. So kids have to be trained about it, more so than you can just say it's illegal. So what do you think about the education in terms of?
Well, it's a parenting issue, and it's not something that the DARE and we don't have DARE in our schools, I don't believe anymore, because the funding's gone away. But my kids grew up in the DARE program, and
did it work?
For one of mine. Well, what I'm saying is that. I don't have any scientific research to back me up, but I think peer pressure is a hell of a lot tougher than what parental advice may be, yep, and who you hang with. I'll go on record as saying that I didn't adopt it, but I married a woman with 2 children that their father died of alcoholism and drug use at age 30. And I know that marijuana was part of that package. And I don't know, it wasn't the total package, but at age 30, he passed away. Doing things that he shouldn't have been doing, but they had a legacy and a problem in their father's side of the family of alcoholism and other issues, right? That the men died young, and so of my 2 children, one of them is doing fine, another one has struggled and has had problems, but it wasn't with pot, it was with prescription medications, and then it was meth. And there's not anything that I can do any tougher than we're doing now to deal with those problems, because I don't prescribe pills. And I think a lot of things that are prescribed to people now that they go home with to get hooked on, they don't realize the problem. I was in the pediatric intensive care center in Kent, where babies go when they're born with an addiction. It's not a friendly sight to see. And a lot of these are prescription medications that mother was given because they had pain problems and they became pregnant while, right, with this problem. And so there's a lot of drugs that anything that we put in our system has an opposite equal reaction somewhere in our system. Right. I'm not saying that everyone in our community should go buy pot or that they should. I'm saying that they should have that choice if they want, because our state allows it, our county allows it, and why can't we? And this year there's a $6 million pot of money because of the old taxation that will filter down to the cities and counties of the ones that are approved it, which isn't a lot of money. And it may only mean like $4,000 to us currently. But the law changes in July 2017, where that year will be $50 million split, and it's projected to be $100 million the following year. That's our cut of the 30% or the 37% that they take in. And so it could mean putting or paying for another half a police officer or drug programs in our city we're going to have those problems whether we legalize it or not, because they're packing it in with them. The drugs are coming in, and so will the problems. The argument from the council, at least a couple of the council members have brought up the impact to the fishing industry, that it's not allowed on the water, it's not allowed on charter boats and fishing boats and so forth, and that will never change unless the government changes their stance. And I had a retired Navy officer that came in and said, "It's been that way the whole time. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It's not up to the city to enforce what happens on people's boats. That's up to those people in that industry. The same as that I can't go down and tell the school how to run their tsunami evacuation plan. I mean, it's a far stretch there, but it wouldn't be policed any different than it is today. Because I was on a fishing boat a couple of times this summer, a couple of different ones for fishing, and they had plaques on there that said marijuana is not allowed to be used on the boat. Okay, it's not allowed. See what I'm saying? It's not allowed.
You can restrict its use the same way you can restrict alcohol, tobacco.
Absolutely.
The restricted substance.
And I don't want to lose your thought, because I know you had a question, but it's legalized in Alaska now. And so does that mean people that travel from Westport to Alaska, they're not going to go into the ports? They're going to anchor out because they don't want their people to be near a town that sells marijuana. And I said that it doesn't make sense. It's an adult choice. Now you can fire your deckhand if they use it, or they bring it on your boat. You can fire them.
Well,
but I'm saying you can't restrict people from being a part of a community. In El Waco, and El Waco is similar to Westport, but not near the size, and there was much production. Their planning commission approved it, and it's zoned legal to be sold in sold in El Waco, except no one's applied for a license. And the council would still have to approve it because, but I'm just saying is that the planning commission had the foresight not to completely ban it. So when it happens, they'll deal with it when it happens, when somebody applies for a license. I'm not even confident that someone will come to Westport. If there's only so many licenses available per county, why wouldn't they go into a place that has higher per capita?
Right. Yeah, I was wondering about that. The other aspect of marijuana that's sort of always is a problematic is the whole testing, in terms of intoxication and driving. Now, and the question that we use it to in employment. I had talked to someone who had temporary employment, and they use testing. If you have had marijuana, you can't get a job. They won't help you find a job. There's a lot of ripple effects to it because of the way we test for it. So it's not to say that it's a simple issue, because there are some complex aspects.
It isn't, and you know what? I'm not a decision maker when it comes to that. Somewhere in the future, and I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime. Hopefully, if I live a long life, it will. But those laws may change. But employers don't want intoxicated people. I don't care if it's OxyContin prescribed by your doctor. But I'm saying is that right now we have employers that are completely drug free, except as a caveat is if it's prescribed, they don't have much legal wiggle room on that one. And so, and I've been on the jobs team here in Grace Harbor, and a lot of the employers say that, we'll interview people on Monday and we'll go through a crew on Tuesday, and we'll decide we'll have one or two on Monday that we want to potentially hire. And then on Tuesday and on Wednesday, we send them for a drug test. And on Thursday, we start the interviewing process again because they didn't pass. And because they had to pass the P test to get hired. And so they have to start all over again because that's their policy, that they won't hire you if you use drugs.
Well, I think we need to be a little more specific. I mean, there's cocaine, there's heroin, there's all kinds of drugs that it could be. But in terms of marijuana, it stays in your system for a longer period of time, and you can be very discriminating. You could have been a week ago you had marijuana, yet it's still going to be positive in your system. So has the employment changed on that?
It hasn't. It hasn't, because they have a zero tolerance policy. But what I'm saying is that I see where that's going to change. It's not something I'm going to go out and advocate and beat the drum on to change it, because that's not my bailiwick at the current time. I bet if I was a recreational user, I'd be in there beating that drum, though.
Right.
You see, I'm not trying to be.
But if you have a medical subscription prescription,
Right.
you can still get that.
Yeah, but I don't. Some of these employers don't want you using it. You know, I mean, I think that's their right if it's a pre-employment thing, because. But I think that law will change. You know, I think the ACLU will get involved somehow and say, hey, wait a minute, that's their personal. How do you tell a guy he can use Budweiser until he passes out on Friday, come to work on Monday, but he can't smoke a joint on Friday, not come to work on Monday because it's still in his bloodstream? And I think that's where you're getting at too. That doesn't mean he's still impaired.
Right. That
means it's still in his bloodstream. And so I think that'll feather its way out somehow. Common sense tells me that has to. It has to.
It would seem that way.
But I will tell you that I have known at least a handful of people that I grew up around that were very successful business people that were recreational marijuana users frequently when I was in high school and in college, that it didn't impair them. Now, that could have been from my position that I didn't see them impaired, but that I wasn't raised by them, you know, as their children or whatever. What I'm just saying is that they were very successful, productive people, and that lived a long life. And some of them are still alive. You know, some people develop cancer for different reasons, and their life's cut short. But the whole thing is not that I want it legalized so I can purchase it. But if I found a reason 2 years from now that I might need it for medicinal purposes because I have chemo treatments and I get nauseous, I want to be able to do that. And I guess the argument now is, well, you can do it with a prescription. Okay, then where do I get it? And then somebody in the council says, well, you mail order it. Okay, so you're going to make all kinds of rules for me that's legal to do now if my city will allow it to happen. I don't get it. We want a separate set of rules is what I don't get about that. And this is not even close to being done on this issue, because what the council done is it decided to extend the moratorium for another 6 months, and with hopes that I get defeated as mayor and one of the council people that upheld my veto gets replaced, so they can have a total ban on Westport. That's using Robert's rules, and the gamesmanship that's being used right now is not giving the community a quick answer before the election, but put it off till after the election in hopes that we can change Michael Bruce's stance on you being 21 and making it legal, and if you want to buy it, you can buy it. And you know what? I have to live with that. That's the process.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not your decision, but
it's not my decision.
You can help inform as being someone close to the council.
Yeah, and when it comes to the information part, I can't speak from a user's point of view or advocate that, other than the fact that the people that have talked to me and like I said, the ones that I've known growing up, is that I don't see it being the big boogeyman that everyone sees it being. It's been around us all our whole life. I have a cousin that's now 83 or 4 that said he smoked it when he was in the Marines in the 50s in Korea. You know, I mean, this isn't anything new. You know, it isn't. And we'll see what happens. There's also been some, you know, how rumors, you know, when it comes to rumors, I don't usually give it a lot of credence, but during election time is when things really crop up. It's usually because of fear. It's not fear of the unknown. It's fear that one person may get elected and the other one might not. Right. But in my case, there's someone that started a rumor that I plan on having a marijuana dispensary myself, and that I've already picked out the place in town, and that's the reason why I'm trying to get the rules passed, is so Michael Bruce can have his own pot shop. And I'm going, you know what? Let's stop and step back a little bit. And to go back, what I told you a half an hour ago is the mayor doesn't pass the rules and the ordinances and the laws. He enforces them. The planning commission decides on what. We're not zoned for that. Right. And we're not zoned for anything agricultural. So if somebody wanted to grow soybeans, hemp, marijuana, strawberries in Westport, we're not zoned agricultural. And I don't see that changing soon, because we don't have many places for agricultural operations to take place. And we're not zoned to, marijuana is not in one of our allowable uses anywhere in our city. So the planning commission, if they think that it should be sold somewhere, then they have to come up with what zone or what area. So, and the mayor doesn't attend those. It's a quasi-judicial situation where if I go there and I have influence on the planning commission and somewhere to appeal it, then I can't sit in judgment of the appellant's case. And so the council members or the mayor doesn't attend those. So I can't influence the planning commission for what the mayor wants. And also, I don't own property in town, nor have I went out and invested. What if I'm going to buy up all the property? And I asked somebody the other day, I said, what's it cost to apply for a license if someone wants to be considered by the Department of Liquor and Cannabis or whatever the name is? It says it costs $1,000 just to apply. So they think not only is the mayor going to control the planning commission's decision and where it's going to happen, he's going to buy property. He's already sent $1,000 to the state in speculation that it may happen sometime. All of this is stupid. I mean, and to even for me to talk about it, because how ludicrous I think that is, that I would do that, or have any kind of influence. Now, we've had several people over the year that have actually applied for either a location to sell it or for a medical marijuana, but we returned those applications with the fees because it's not an allowable use in our town.
Right.
And we can't even take the fees, right? And so anyone that said, well, how would that happen if it was legal? I said, you would have to apply to the city and you'd have to, go through the state for that or whatever. But I don't know anything about it, folks. It's just that I said I want to veto it so we can talk about it. So it's funny how things will get its legs and people will believe whatever they want. But people need to start using common sense when they hear that.
well, that's part of the conversation in terms of having a conversation about the logic behind behind statements. And I don't think people go deep enough. And I think when we have the internet now, we do have ability to have a longer conversation, a more engaged conversation, Facebook, YouTube, whatever you happen to choose as your platform. But and I think we need to start engaging at a community level, and which one of the reasons why I'm reaching out to you is because I think the conversation needs to extend beyond the council chamber. It needs to go out to the community as general and realize, hey, we're all a part of this and we need to get our facts straight. There's a lot of things I simply don't know. And a part of it, I don't care. I mean, what I want to make sure is that the person that's elected cares about the community. It's a job. It's like any other. Are they going to council meetings? Are they answering questions? Can I get in touch with them? Are they willing to do a silly YouTube hangout? I mean, these are important issues that you need to ask. And I have reached out, and I'll reach out to other council members too, because I think it is probably something that should be continued.
I would really like you to reach out to anyone that has a voice on this, and they don't even have to be on the council, but to offer up suggestions on how our city can be better. Seldom, it's probably happened a few times, but no one ever comes to the council meeting to tell us how well things are. They always have an individual problem, and a lot of it's civil issues between neighbors.
Right.
But what a mayor's job is to make sure everyone gets their hearing and understands the process. They may not welcome the end result, but I made sure they got there. And some of the problems when there's a planning commission making a decision and you have a public hearing, and you could have a whole room full of people saying that they don't think they agree with it, what the planning commission sent forward. If the council says this is what we want, I mean, that's the council is the final answer. But then you can appeal the council's decision too.
Right.
But I've heard once or twice, but not very often, that the person that came to the public hearing, that I didn't hear them out, that I gave somebody else more time or whatever, or let them speak twice. And sometimes that speaking twice is that I'll have a council member that out of order will call on somebody in the audience to speak. They don't realize that that's not their bailiwick, it's mine, is that I'm the one that has to keep the meeting focused. So the person's on their feet starting to respond to a council member, and by the time I get them gavel down or tell them no, then that person got to speak twice.
Right.
But what happens is where someone will say I didn't get to speak twice and get to respond to somebody. This isn't a debate. A public hearing is not a debate. It's to address the council on what your position is and what we should do. When Johnny over here stands up and disagrees with Mary doesn't get a rebuttal time of what John said. That's the system, is that you're here to speak your mind. If they want to debate outside the council chambers or whatever, that's okay, but that's not the time for a debate.
That would be this platform here.
Yeah. And so what I'm saying is, if I cut somebody off, it's because it was inappropriate to allow that action to take place. Because you can imagine if you had 3 people on this side of the room and 4 on this side of the room, it would just be back and forth. It'd be chaotic.
No, you do, especially when you have a divisive environment. And the reason I brought up Robert Rule of Order was to kind of get your feeling on. My channel is about combating the sense of elitism. Okay, because a lot of people feel, well, he doesn't have credentials to say that, or he doesn't have experience. And one thing I say is that if the idea, based on their idea, not based on their credentials, so your credentials are all well and good, it gives you experience, et cetera, but it doesn't make you right about an issue. Just because your credential does not make you right. You have to actually listen to the issue. And that was part of the reason why I was saying, just because someone doesn't know Robert's Rules of Law, it doesn't mean they can't learn them, and doesn't mean, and I was just seeing where you went on that.
And you know what, I hope I don't give the people the impression that I'm a know-it-all, because I'm not. I got a lot of learning to do, and I listen to the community. But also, a good mayor just makes sure that you get heard. And I learned years ago is that, right or wrong, you have to listen to the person's opinion. It makes them feel better when you've listened to them. Whether you agree with them is not always the most important part, but you got to hear them out. And people don't come to a council meeting. They call me on the phone and they start railing about what the council should be doing. I said, you need to come and talk to the council, sir. Talking to me is not talking to the council.
Right.
And then they'll hang up on me because they don't think I'm giving the proper hearing. And they don't understand the process. The council is the one that makes the rules and the decision. And I got to make sure they get a chance to get heard. You don't elect the mayor so that you'll get hired, or that he's your friend, the best guy next door, or that we've been buddies all through your life. One of my attributes that I feel that is really strong for the job of Mayor of Westport is that I didn't grow up here. I don't have this big friends network, and I treat everybody equally and fairly. I don't make decisions just so this group of people are going to like me and this not. It's what's good for the community, and that's what it's all about. And maybe I wasn't clear or articulate enough about when people make decisions. It shouldn't be based on what my faith is or how I want to see the nirvana in the city of Westport be. It's what our community needs to grow, and what does my community want. Mm-hmm. And if my community decides that they were wrong when they voted in favor of it, which I believe that it's even stronger in favor of now than it was 3 years ago when 502 was on the ballot, that's okay. I can live with it because I'm not a user. But we need to get that hearing. We need to discuss it, and we need to let the planning commission that is at odds, bring that forward. I mean,
but even if you were a user, I mean that's a cop out.
Okay, but that's the truth. Because if I was a user, then I would be imposing my belief system on you.
Right. And that's the reason not to do it. Because
and that's why I'm saying the community voted. That's what I said in my veto. I said, how can you turn your back on the state, county? The city of Westport voters during that time when there was low voters at the county level and the state level as well, is that the state level voted 50-some%, 55 or 4, and then the county voted, but the city of Westport was higher approval rating than the county and the state. Our city was higher, and how can my council say that my community is against it? And so what they've used is that, well, it was a low voter turnout. If the right people would have voted, 56 more voters here, 100 voters there, it would be different. And I said that could be said about Seattle. That the biggest block of voters in big cities, if they would have voted the other way, just a few percentage points, it would have been state law. See what I'm saying? So, but no, if I were to vote just my own belief system, we probably wouldn't have a drugstore in town. Maybe, I don't know. If that was my belief system, because if I don't use drugs, why would I want you to use them? Even if they were prescribed.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, no, I mean, there's a certain point you have to say, well, these are the laws, and if you don't like the rules, then we need to change the laws, and we can discuss that, but that's not what we're discussing. It's just having the conversation. I think it's more important.
Right.
I think we're over time by now, so I want.
Yeah, but everybody's getting them.
We actually have 3 viewers, so you actually can tell how many viewers you have there at the bottom. So.
Well, it can't be my mother or father because they're deceased.
No, but I wanted people to get a chance to chat. No one had a chat, but I didn't really expect that. But I wanted to give the opportunity for people to get a chance if they want to know who you are. But a lot of times people don't seek the information to know who somebody is, and it's there. You can say, I'm not afraid to talk to the public.
Well, the people that were watching today, and I'm sure they'll pick up, other people will watch this because it can be archived, right? So they can see it. Oh, yeah. Is that an hour with me is not really a true window to my world, but it at least raises a shade. I'm not going to be different next week than I was 5 years ago. I ran into a guy that I hadn't seen in 35 years, and he started laughing, and we're joking. And he says, "You haven't changed since whatever." I said, "Well, I don't." And I'm just who I am, and I do care about my community, and I want you to get more people on here to talk about their community and how to improve it. I want to have people come to our council meetings and talk about it. Not only have concerns, but also have potential recommendations on how to improve things. Mm-hmm. Anybody can shoot holes in anything, but how do we repair those holes?
And I think that's the growth mindset, or the constructive approach. And I think that's what it's about. I mean, we're not about destroying people's livelihoods. We're about making it work together and people get what they want from the community. I think we have a very wonderful community, and we forget that sometimes.
It's perfect in so many different ways. And I want to thank you for doing this. I didn't realize that you had this. And if you have something that's more controversial, we can talk about it.
Well, right now, no, for sure. I would love to do it again. And hopefully I'll reach out to the rest of the community to do it. I've thought about doing it more community-related. Currently, I'm more of a broader issues, as I learn what are my core values in terms of, and it's a conversation.
And I will say this, Mark, that if I'm reelected, that I'm willing to come back quarterly or however you want me to sit down and have a conversation. More people may watch and may type in some questions. We can continue this.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks.
I'll stop.